those who celebrate Happy Primary Eve.
Victoria Watlington, District 3.
Patrick Baker, City Attorney.
All right. We have consent items on our agenda, items 12 through 29. We have a note from Ms. Mayfield for separate votes on several items. And so if you will take note of the following ones for a separate vote. And Ms. Mayfield, track me if I make sure I've inclusive all. Add 14? Not 14. So item 19, item 20, item 21, item 22, item 24, 28, and 29 will have a separate vote.
And yes, ma'am, just to clarify, number 19 was a speaker in the chamber.
That's true. I should have mentioned that. We have a speaker on item 19, so we'll do that one in the chamber. I think that Ms. Mayfield has been working with Ms. Harris on a series of questions, so I'll let Ms. Mayfield address those items for the separate vote.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Maria, I had, excuse me, if we start with number 20, this is year 3 of our internship program for the youth, and I sent you a question as far as what is our starting intern pay, since we do have in here that these are paid internships, and when we're looking at what mainly is the pay comparable to some of our corporate partners, and what is that internship pay?
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. And this is for juniors in high school, and the starting pay, so it's the starting pay throughout the program, so it's a little short, like it's over the summer or a semester type deal, and it's a fellowship of $15 an hour.
Thank you. That's good information to know. I wanted a clarification of that. Mayor, do I just go through all of my questions?
Well, no, if you're ready to.
Okay, move to approve.
All right, we have a motion to approve item 20, which is the three-year internship program for youth. Let's go ahead, and do we have a second to that?
Second.
Do we have a second? All in favor, raise your hands. Anyone opposed? Thank you. All right, Ms. Mayfield, we'll do your singular ones that you've pulled, and then we'll do the remaining ones as a result.
Thank you, Mayor. 21, the public auction for disposal of surplus equipment. I wanted to get an idea of how much has the city earned on surplus sales since our last council request for surplus?
Thank you. And yes, for this one, this was specific for our auction, an on-site auction, and the last auction was in April, and it gave the city a net of $831,000, but there's also ongoing online, but smaller numbers, so there's actually additional revenue that comes in throughout the year as well as our auction, but our last auction was $831,000 net to the city.
Thank you. That's also good information to know. Move to approve.
All right, do we have a second? We have a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please raise your hand. Anyone opposed? No opposed. Thank you. All right. The next one is item 22.
Yes, ma'am. This one is for the MRIM remedy for 940 Eileen Circle through Housing and Neighborhood Services. I wanted to get an idea on this, and this was really a question for our city attorney. Mr. Baker, I wanted to find out, with our MRIMs, do we charge the residents for the demolition costs that we pay up front for MRIM? Because this demolition cost, I believe we estimated around $9,000.
Yes, the demolition cost is added as a lien to the property, so when the property gets sold or foreclosed upon, that's when we would get our money back.
Thank you for the clarification. Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Anyone opposed? All right, and now we'll go to item 24.
Yes, now this one is the property transaction Beckwith Meadow for the storm drainage improvement project, parcel number 27. I'm trying to get an understanding, because what we have on here is for 7,200 square feet, which is 0.165 of the total parcel area. is 7,200 square feet, but we're asking for an easement of 692 square feet of this. So I want to know if, when staff is looking at a potential condemnation, because the property owner is concerned about the amount of compensation, which the compensation for this was $22,725. My question to Marie is, we just recently had property reevaluations, and that is what your property tax bill is going to be based on for the next 4 years. This particular parcel and home has a value of $349,400. Their tax bill previously was $24.99 in 2019. With the new reevaluation, that same tax bill is now for 2023, $2,701.99. All this public record through Mecklenburg County Spatialist. So I wanted to know if this easement reduces the value of their home, because unfortunately, fortunately for me, I get everything online, but it did not have any pictures attached, so I couldn't see exactly where this easement was. So I want to make sure, I want to know if this is going to have an impact with reducing the value of the home, and if that's taken into consideration.
Yes, ma'am, not for this particular one. They already have an easement, a water easement in their backyard, and this is growing that stormwater easement in their backyard, and it would still be grass. They could still use it how they use it now. The only impact would be if the city needs to come in and update a project years from now. But it's still, so this particular one wasn't, but to your point, if there are some that are impacting the property value, general services staff, that's part of the negotiations, then they do factor that in. It's not just the value of the portion in those cases.
Thank you for that clarification. Move to approve.
I have a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please raise your hand. Anyone opposed? That's unanimous. Item 28, I believe, is next.
No, it's unanimous. Okay. I
I'm
want to
sorry.
confirm Mr. Drake's vote.
Ms. Mayfield?
No.
I'm sorry.
The clerk was trying to confirm the vote.
Confirm Mr. Drake's vote.
Oh,
Yeah, I voted.
Okay.
all right. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't hear that. All right, Ms. Mayfield?
Number 28, Shamrock Drive, which this one I definitely have a challenge with. It's basically the same question, excuse me, as the consideration, because this particular property, again, that new reevaluation has this particular parcel appraised at $820,400. The 2019 tax bill on this was $4,574.21. The latest appraisal has this tax bill now increased to $6,156.77. This one, will the easement reduce the value of the property? Also, I asked for Ms. Harris to provide pictures, because we don't have pictures, because this one I have a concern about, because it's a new build, and I feel like you have to have permitting in order to develop and build a home. Seemed like there should have been a discussion during that permitting process. When you look at the house that's directly next to it, how the setback is a lot further back. If we were to approve this particular request for this sidewalk addition, that would eat up a good part of this front yard. So whether they have a child or a small pet, they don't have a front yard to play in anymore. So I'm trying to figure out, one, in our process, if there is a rezoning or if there's a permit for build, and if we know that we already have in the system that we're going to be identifying certain easements within a 5 to 7 year window, are we sharing that on the front end versus you start development and then we come back and we say we're going to need a portion of this property, of which this particular portion is about 127 square feet?
So yes, ma'am, we try to be as transparent as possible. Like you mentioned, 7 years out, we would not know, the detail level needed. But our plans are public, and as soon as they come through the planning phase into development, but there wouldn't be that much of a window, as you said. But as much as possible, yes, we do work with them.
So what we have in here noted as far as the property owner's concerns is that the property owner is concerned about the design of the project. And I thank you again, Ms. Harris, for the photos. I can see where there currently is a sidewalk, but also I can see the properties on either side of this particular build. The setback is a lot different. So a widening of the sidewalk isn't going to impact the house to the left or the right the way it potentially is going to impact this one. And this was a question I didn't ask you earlier, and I don't know if we have the appropriate staff here to discuss it, because this is in my colleague, Councilmember Anderson's district, and I didn't have a chance to reach out to her this morning to get her feel on this. But when we're looking, I'm concerned about this one. I've asked the question. The easement is considerable, not just the dollar amount with this sidewalk. I will not be supporting this, so my colleagues can do a motion.
Do we have a motion for item 28? We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please raise your hand. All opposed? All right, thank you, Ms. Mayfield. Our last one is 29.
Yes, Madam Mayor, and thank you. This one is also Shamrock Drive improvements, parcel number 13. This one, the property has outstanding title issues, so we want to move forward. But I wanted to get an idea of what is the impact of on this particular property for this sewer easement. Because again, if we look at the photos, and I don't know, Councilmember Anderson, did you get a chance, do you get a copy of the photos for the easements? I didn't get it until earlier today. But when we look at the impact of this area, I want to get a better idea of what that impact could be on that particular resident and that residential owner.
Yes, ma'am. And just to clarify, this one, the owner is completely in agreement, but they weren't able to clear the title. So otherwise, this would have been an acquisition. So there's no concerns outstanding from the property owner. But this one, and sorry, everybody can't see the picture, but it's a temporary easement for construction, and then like 11 square feet more of water easement, but it'll still be grass, so they can still utilize that yard the same way they do today.
So it'll be grass that the city we're providing?
No, ma'am.
The grass for the easement, because they
Yeah.
currently have some grass, but it's also dirt.
Excuse me. We'll once we go in and we'll make it grass, but we don't maintain it. Then it goes to the homeowner's yard, and to your point, yes, homeowners always have to mow over their easements. The city doesn't.
Okay, so we will provide, once we complete our work, we'll provide the sod to continue, but they will be maintaining the property
Correct.
moving forward. Okay, what's to approve? Thank you.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All hearing none. All in favor, raise your hands. Anyone opposed? No one's opposed. Okay. So now if we can go back to the consent items 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. Do I have a motion for?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion for items 12 through 18, please raise your hand. All right. That takes us through our consent agenda. And now it's time for our action review agenda overview. The first item that we have is under our Housing Trust Fund recommendations. And I guess we are going to have the manager and Mr. Heath come and talk about this with us. Hey, thank you, Mr. Heath. Please join us at the podium. We're ready to talk about the Housing Trust Fund recommendations. Now, and you'll address the change in the agenda as well today?
Mayor Latz, if I could ask for clarification on that last question.
Okay, no, that's good. I'm
Okay.
sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go through the Housing Trust Fund recommendations.
Thank you, Sean Heath, Housing and Neighborhood Services. A quick refresh on the Housing Trust Fund. I think everybody's familiar with the fund itself, and this is our vehicle that we rely on to provide gap funding for affordable housing, the creation and preservation of affordable housing throughout the city. The Housing Trust Fund has been in place since 2002, and since that time, it's been relied upon to support creation and preservation of over 11,000 units. As we've discussed before, the reference to gap financing simply means that for any given project, we're looking for an attractive leverage ratio, and on average, for every dollar that the city puts into a project, we're generally seeing other investors that are bringing about $7 to the table. So we're just one piece of the capital stack. On the next two bullets here, this is direct reference to the value proposition that City Council expects to see. First, everything that we do associated with affordable housing investments will come with a long-term deed restriction, which can vary from anywhere from 15 to 99 years, depending on the nature of the project. There are also requirements around focus on area median income. All of the projects we support will be at 80% AMI or below. Where it falls within the AMI continuum depends on the nature of the project. And as a matter of policy, a number of years ago, City Council established a requirement whereby for multifamily units, multifamily developments, that those include 20% of the units devoted to 30% AMI and below households. And then, of course, the funding source for the Housing Trust Fund is through the housing bonds that are put in front of voters through a referendum every other year, and voters have historically been very supportive of the housing bonds. This is our standard schedule for the Summer Housing Trust Fund RFP, released in late June, submissions late July, the briefing this evening, and then 2 weeks from now put in front of you for consideration and approval. On September 21st, you'll receive what we refer to as the HDF booklet, which will provide you with a project summary for each of the recommended projects, along with staff's rationale for the recommendation and some other data points, including location scores. One thing we wanted to share with you before we get into the specific recommendations is this is really the first RFP where we're activating on all of the outcomes from the Housing Trust Fund tune-up, which we completed earlier this year. Some pieces of the Housing Trust Fund tune-up were incorporated into the winter RFP, but this was really the first opportunity to activate on everything. So we wanted to highlight a few things here. And first, you can see the minimum affordability period for new multifamily construction projects. Now in our RFP, we've established a floor of 40 years for those projects. And if you recall, in pre-COVID days, generally the norm for the new construction multifamily projects was 30 years. So we were pleased with the responses that we received to this RFP. As you'll see in a moment, we're continuing to see some positive trends associated with developer commitments on affordability, and that's as a direct outcome from the Housing Trust Fund tune-up. Second, within the RFP, we established a new evaluation criteria and preferences. First, there's reference now to cost per unit per year, which is simply another way for us to underscore the importance of extended affordability periods. So all else equal, if we have two projects with a cost per unit of $30,000, we're more interested in ones that have affordability periods of 50, 60, 99 years, for instance. So we're starting to move not necessarily away from the cost per unit metric, but this is a slightly more sophisticated way to bundle together both cost and affordability into a single number. Second, one of the things that we're doing now is, as part of the Housing Trust Fund RFP, is we're also requesting developers to provide us with some indication for their willingness to accept federal funds, and their willingness to accept federal funds is reflected favorably in our review. So this is a way for us to take some pressure off of the Housing Trust Fund, and with some of the recommendations tonight, you'll see that we've braided together locally sourced Housing Trust Fund dollars along with federal funds such as CDBG and HOME and HOPWA would be some examples. Third bullet point here is developer commitments to supportive services or economic mobility investments. Over the last 12 months or so, in conversations here with council, many of you have encouraged us to have more of a horizontal lens as it relates to our housing investments. And this is intended to address that sort of feedback. So what we're asking developers to do is, in addition to your funding request and kind of the regular value proposition that you would put in front of us, what are some specific commitments you're willing to make related to supportive services or economic mobility? A number of our development partners are still kind of probing into that area. I will say that Ascent Housing, which you're familiar with through a number of our NOAA deals, naturally occurable affordable housing deals in the past, continues to distinguish themselves in this area. And we do have one proposal from Ascent Housing tonight where we'll talk specifically about that point. Number 3 here, higher MWSBE utilization targets. So in partnership with Steve Coker and the team, we retooled our minimum MWSBE requirements in the Housing Trust Fund RFP. So for example, now for a developer that receives an HTF award of it in the past, it was 10%. So pushing for more aggressive participation in that area. And then last, the idea of having a rolling RFP, so to speak, came through the Housing Trust Fund tune-up, which is just a recognition that oftentimes with NOAAs, they're opportunistic. It's driven by timing in the marketplace. It doesn't always lend itself to the fixed schedule that we have for our traditional RFPs. So we released the rolling RFP in May. So far, we've only received one formal response, which is reflected in one of the recommendations this evening. But the idea there is to just keep that open throughout the year, and subject to available funding, we'll evaluate proposals. What we like about it is it demonstrates to the market that we have a transparent process, transparent review criteria. So any member of the community that has great NOAA ideas that are eligible, we encourage them to pursue that. It's available at any point. This is a format you're accustomed to before, and I mean, I think over time it's turned into even more of an eye chart. So this is a summary of the 7 recommended projects. And what I'm going to do here is really hit the highlights in the very bottom row. And then since there's a 1-page development summary for each of the recommendations, we'll just jump straight into those. And then we can come back to this slide as a bit of a home base at the end, if it's helpful. So first, I would say that we have a good mix of different types of projects. We've got some 4% and 9% LIHTC, new construction multifamily, so that's a mouthful, but those are the 4 at the top. We have one NOAA opportunity, one homeownership opportunity, and one supportive housing, transitional housing in particular here. So it's a good mix of different project types. Going down to the bottom of the slide, you can see that these 7 recommendations in total are 730 units. The overall recommended award is about $17.5 million. Of that $17.5 million, $13 million would be sourced from the Housing Trust Fund, and $4.5 million would be sourced from federal sources. You can see here on affordability period, this is an average across all the different project types. And as I mentioned before, you wouldn't necessarily compare some, there's a little bit of apples and oranges in the average here. But the bottom line here, the punchline is we're continuing to see positive trends in terms of extending affordability periods in these proposals. And then finally, on the 2 final columns on the right, we're continuing to see costs, prices moderate. You know, we experienced significant spikes during COVID. I know back in the October, November of last year, there was concern about spending more and more HTF dollars for less and less units. And I can't predict the future, and we obviously can't control market conditions. But I think with some of the things that we've done with the tune-up and some of the experienced development partners that we have stepping forward with some good proposals, we're seeing positive movement in terms of cost per unit and cost per unit per year. So like I said, I'm not trying to rush through this. I just didn't want to spend 30 minutes on this one slide. So we'll jump into some of the specifics and then come back to this as needed. One last point on this. There's generally about a 6-week time period between the time the proposals are submitted and when we come to council to make our recommendations. And I just want to underscore that that's really our opportunity to do the vetting on the projects, and it's our opportunity to do the negotiations as well. So we don't just accept the proposals at face value. We are always looking for ways to squeeze more value out of the proposals. You know, we go about this in a way where we're respectful of you know, the other side of the negotiation, but here we were successful in squeezing out about $3 million from the original asks. So that's not reflected on here, the original asks. We're just showing you essentially the negotiated outcomes, but wanted you to be aware that we're working hard on your behalf to try and get the best deals possible. We think it's always helpful to give you a sense for what the AMI mix looks like. So this would be across all 7 recommended projects that we'll discuss tonight. You can see 160 of the total 730 units would be at the 30% AMI level, which represents 22% of the total number of units. You can follow the numbers on the way down there. This looks generally consistent with what we've seen in the past. Of course, it depends on the types of projects underneath of it, whether it's home ownership or new multifamily construction or NOAAs. And I would remind everybody that for a family of 4, and this will change from year to year, of course, but for a family of 4 right now at 30% AMI, that would equate to about $30,000 a year. So these are easier to remember this year because it just so happens they align with the percentages. For a family of 4 at 80% AMI, it just so happens that that would be about $80,000 a year. So good AMI mix. A lot of this is obviously heavily influenced by council direction and policy in terms of what we're seeing at the 30% AMI level and below. So I will quickly go through each of these recommended each of the recommended projects, and then we'll open it up for questions here. So first is Arrowwood Homes. This is a project in District 3. We've got a very experienced developer, the NRP Group. We've done a handful of projects with the NRP Group here locally over the last few years, and I believe they have about 800 units that are in various stages of development with city support. So to really in each case, what I'm going to do is really just try and drive directly into what are the defining attributes of the project that staff is excited about. Here, number 1, it's an opportunity to leverage city-owned land. And you can see on the slide that we've referenced here in the second row in the financial summary that we've identified the most recent assessed value, appraised value of the city-owned land. Number 2, affordability period of 99 years is very noteworthy. Number 3, as I mentioned before, some of the projects we've rated local and federal funds for this particular project. The overall $5.5 million in gap financing would be a combination of $2.5 million from the trust fund and $3 million from federal funding sources. We love the location for this particular project site. It's directly adjacent to light rail, the Arrowwood station, and the project also has a mix of bedrooms, 1, 2, 3, and 4 bedrooms, and that's noteworthy. We don't often see 4-bedroom opportunities. The last thing I would mention about this particular project is on the city-owned land piece, and just as a reminder that we in the Housing and Neighborhood Services Department don't just pluck city-owned land out of the portfolio and say this will be used for affordable housing. This has gone through a multi-year process with council engagement along the way. So back in 2021, in partnership with General Services, a handful of city-owned parcels were identified that were suitable for affordable housing. It's kind of the same exercise that Phil Rieger talked about with council not that long ago, that they're in the midst of coordinating now with departments like Housing and Economic Development. Well, they did one back in 2021. Handful of sites were located. We put those sites out for an RFP, and we asked developers for these particular sites, what are your best ideas for how we could bring affordable housing to life on these locations? So on February 7th of 2022, I came to council with recommendations. This was one of them. NRP had proposed 120 affordable units on this particular location, multifamily rental. And as we expected, and as I had shared at the time, for many of these city-owned projects, we expect them to come back in seeking housing trust fund support at the appropriate time, which is just what this one is doing here. It's just what the Crossland Southeast project in District 7 did in the last cycle. So this is all as expected. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that the city-owned land piece was through a defined process and with council engagement along the way. Skipped one. Second project, Central at Old Concord. This is a District 1 project. It's about 5 miles northeast of Uptown. It's pretty close to the District 1 and District 4 boundaries. The Annex Group is an experienced developer. Over 1,500 affordable units across the country have been developed during the last decade. There's one fairly recent project that the city has provided support for, and it's currently under construction in District 4. In terms of the defining attributes for this project that were most attractive to us, first you can see the investment per unit and investment per unit per year are quite attractive, as well as, once again, an affordability period of 99 years. And once again, we really like the location here. It's about a half mile from light rail. This one is the Old Concord Road Station in particular. And this is a 200-unit project, which you can see. Two important things that I wanted to mention on this project. One is it has not yet received planning approval. So the developer is in the process of revising the plans in order to accommodate feedback from the planning team. And our hope is that all that can be settled by September 25th, when this would be scheduled for a vote. That may not happen. And if that's the case, and if council has an appetite for this project in the RCA, we could have it structured as a conditional funding based on them addressing the planning requirements and ultimately receiving the planning approval before any funds are released. So wanted to make you aware that we're still working through that process. And the second thing is I wanted to make you aware, for this particular location, there are currently 17 mobile homes, and these are occupied mobile homes. We've been working very closely with the developer to understand what their intent would be, what their plans would be associated with relocation. And the only reason that we're bringing this to you as a recommendation today is because at the staff level, we're comfortable with the plan that they have developed. And if I may, I'd just like, because this is a kind of a bit of a unique scenario, I wanted to just outline a couple items related to that relocation plan, and then I'll be happy to answer any other questions that you have. So the first thing is, even though this particular project is not contemplated as a federally funded project, the developer has agreed to voluntarily adhere to HUD standards associated with scenarios like this, where you have an acquisition and redevelopment that results in a need for relocation. So the elements of that relocation plan are fairly well outlined in the HUD guidelines. So it doesn't leave a lot to the imagination, and I mean that in a good way. So the developer will hire a relocation consultant that will go through a process to do a resident needs assessment, one-on-one interviews, and then essentially provide housing navigation and referral services. And the developer will also have a budget that's available for relocation assistance. For example, reasonable moving costs would be covered by the developer in this instance. So we're comfortable with the plan that they're sketching out. Once again, if council has an appetite for this particular project, what our intent would be is to establish, either in the RCA or in the agreement itself, that the developer would be required to complete the relocation plan as a condition of our funding. And the last thing I'll mention on that point, because we've grappled with this one over the last couple of weeks certainly, is we can't predict the future. We don't know what would happen if this particular project doesn't go forward. But it's not unreasonable to think of a scenario where, with this site being on the market, that another developer could purchase this location and, without city funding, do nothing associated with relocation assistance. They could have a very abrupt displacement with zero navigation support services or covering any relocation costs. So I don't know for certain that would happen, but it's certainly something that could happen. And we've all seen scenarios in the last 3 years where things have happened very abruptly in the community. So I like the idea of working with a development partner who's willing to lean into this with us voluntarily on the front end to ensure that these households are treated fairly and equitably. Sycamore Station 2, District 1 again. District 1 again. So this project is in East Charlotte, close to W.T. Harris. And Winterwood Development has a lot of experience in the multifamily rental housing market throughout the South. They've developed over 1,700 units over the past 10 years. Here, the defining attributes, the affordability period, and AMI mix, and cost per unit were all very attractive to us. You can see with the AMI mix that all of the units are at 60% and below, and a few of them at 30% in order to meet our requirements. So good leverage ratio here as well as 1:20. Oops. Okay, trying to move along here as fast as I can. Mount Moriah Seniors, this project is located in Matthews. It's about 1 mile from the center of town. And you may ask, Matthews, that's outside of Charlotte. So the $825,000 recommended here would be sourced from the HOME program, which is administered by HUD. So once again, it's one of our federal funding sources. And for the HOME program, the city of Charlotte receives this funding kind of on behalf of a consortium of the city itself, Mecklenburg County, and the 6 towns. And, you know, generally speaking, a large share of the home funds are deployed in the city of Charlotte, just given our size relative to the other entities. But there is an expectation and an understanding that the funds be deployed across the full consortium. Warren Wooten on my team participates in periodic meetings with the consortium partners to identify potential projects that could be pursued outside of the city of Charlotte. And this one emerged as a great opportunity. In terms of the defining attributes that we were attracted to, very experienced developer with Laurel Street. We've, of course, done probably a dozen or more projects with Laurel Street over the past 10 years or so. When you look at cost profile, affordability period, and AMI mix, those all look very attractive. For this one, at the AMI 30% and below, 20 units actually represents 28% of the total number of units, which is typically what you'll see for the 9% LIHTC deals. You're going to see something even better than what we require. We like the fact that this supports a regional approach to housing solutions. One thing that's not mentioned explicitly on the slide is we like the fact that this project is yet again another opportunity to partner with Mecklenburg County. Mecklenburg County has pledged a significant amount of funds in support of this particular project. And I would just close this one out by mentioning that the Mayor of Matthews has submitted a letter of support for the project.
I'd like to know if you'd like to take questions on each slide that you're doing, because we have some requests, but also we can wait until the end. What helps you best to address this?
So I'll, of course, be deferential to your preference. My preference, I guess, would be, since I'm almost done, would be to just plow through it and then
Right.
pause.
We'll do that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Kings on Lamar, District 1. This one's near the Elizabeth neighborhood. So this is supportive housing. More specifically, it's transitional housing. And the idea here is to rehab 2 existing buildings. These are the old King's College buildings.
I know them well.
Okay, you know them well. Okay. And the idea would be to do rehab on these buildings, and then in summer or fall of 2024, establish a transitional housing program for men experiencing homelessness. Roof Above actually leased these buildings back in 2020, and then during COVID, they used these facilities for emergency shelters for a period of time. Then in 2021, they purchased the buildings with an intent to develop a plan such as this, which we're presented with here tonight. In terms of the defining attributes that attracted us to the project, Roof Above is, of course, a very experienced nonprofit partner. They work across the entire continuum in terms of street outreach, emergency shelters, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing. This program is laser focused on men who are employed and or in vocational training. So kind of tying back to that reference I made earlier, our desire to look for those opportunities to do things across the horizontals and not just purely in our housing tower. Like I said, these would be men that are either already employed or in vocational training, but experiencing homelessness. The target stay would be about 18 months with supportive services provided during that time period in order to position these men to be better equipped for life-sustaining wages and permanent housing. The participants in the program would be required to pay a fee of $100 per month, so they would have skin in the game. That fee would be waived during the periods when they're in vocational training, which is estimated to be about 4 to 6 months. And given the focus on workplace readiness, this will be a substance-free environment, so there'll be periodic breathalyzers and drug tests to ensure these individuals are really ready to go into the workforce, or if they're in the workforce, to ensure they're ready to sustain that. So once again, this is the one supportive housing request that we have in this particular mix, and we're excited about it in terms of the cost profile and affordability period. And you can see the AMI mix on here as well. Okay, we have one home ownership opportunity, which is here. This is a Dream Key project in District 1 in the Druid Hills neighborhood. This will be 14 units, 7 duets. You can see a picture here. So these 7 duets would be on scattered sites in Druid Hills. And the defining attribute that was of most interest to us is, if you look at the sales price range in the financial summary, we know there's a severe shortage of affordable housing. We know in particular there's a shortage of for sale housing at the sub $300,000 level. So this is a model that can help in a small way, but in a meaningful way, move us in the direction of providing more access for individuals at the 60 to 80% AMI level. As an aside, I would mention that through some conversations with Councilmember Watlington, we've discussed the idea of having a part of our January committee meeting devoted to homeownership models. Because I think I mentioned before that the value proposition for the multifamily stuff that we do, I think is pretty straightforward. But for the homeownership models, whether it be Dream Key or Habitat or Westside Community Land Trust, they're more complicated when you get under the hood. I'm still learning a lot about it, and we think it'd be a great opportunity to talk about the different models in a committee setting and spend as much time as the committee's interested in to really understand what, I think in all cases, we're trying to do and what our partners are trying to do is to balance affordability with economic mobility. And, the affordability piece is pretty intuitive, right? We want to have homes that are at affordable levels for low-income buyers, and we'd like to keep that particular home affordable for low-income buyers for a long period of time. But the balancing act is for individuals that are low income that are moving into that house, we also want them to benefit from home ownership. And we want them to benefit from having the opportunity to harvest the equity in that particular residence. So all of these home ownership models kind of find different ways to balance the home ownership and economic mobility equation. And in committee in January, we're going to ask Warren Wooten on my team to spend some time kind of going through those and talking about some of the pros and cons in hopes of getting some feedback from committee if there's a strong point of view on kind of where on that continuum City Council would like us to be. So once again, this is 14 units and all in the 60 to 80% AMI level. Last one is Swan Run. This is the one naturally occurable affordable housing opportunity. And you can see here funds recommended are $2.4 million with an affordability period of 20 years. And I would say quickly, first of all, the location for this. So in District 7, it's a little bit north of the Arboretum. It's kind of, it's off Providence Road, but you wouldn't see it unless you really wanted to see it because it's not right on the main road. But it's tucked away in between Pineville Matthews and Ray Road. I run by this place all the time, and Swan Meadow Lane or Swan's Run, it's about a 3/4 mile stretch. And it's a very diverse area where there's single family, there's multifamily, there are townhomes. And so I love the diversity on the street. And the defining attributes for this particular project, so it's 92 units, as I mentioned before. The project was built in the 1970s. It's a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. And we're always looking for opportunities in District 7 to activate on affordable housing. This has the normal AMI mix from Ascent Housing, which is very attractive. We have 30% of the units devoted to 30% AMI. As we've talked about before with NOAA's, it's really a twofold value proposition. One is we're getting the deed restriction for 20 years, but the other is we're also minimizing risk of displacement for the existing residents here in this location. The cost per unit for this particular NOAA, if you look here on the upper right of 26,000-ish, is about 10% lower than the cost per unit for the last 2 NOAA deals that council approved. You'll recall Charlotte Woods and Pepper Tree were both very large NOAAs, 266 and 292 units respectively. So, we like where this one lands kind of on that cost profile. And then last, as I had alluded to before, Ascent Housing has really done a lot around economic mobility and supportive services because they have this community health worker model in partnership with Atrium in place in their NOAA communities. So what we love about this is there's a community health worker actually assigned to a community. They're embedded in that community. And they're providing some mix of on-site programming, one-on-one counseling, and referral navigation. And it's focused on a range of barriers. So it could be healthcare, it could be childcare, it could be education, workforce development, that sort of thing. So like I said before, not only are they doing this, but they're developing a sustainable model to keep doing it. In terms of the Housing Trust Fund balance, I will just mention that if the 7 projects this evening were approved in 2 weeks, the balance would go from roughly $22 million today to about $9 million. We can talk more about that if you're interested at the end. And then I did want to make you aware there is one project that was not recommended for funding. Here it's West Boulevard Flats in District 3. We think the project has merit, no doubt, but just in evaluation, as we're comparing and contrasting across opportunities, there were other ones that we felt at this particular time were most attractive. And it also weighed heavily on us that the funding request for this particular project, you can see in the upper right corner, is about $7.5 million. And given what I showed you on the previous slide, that would really stretch resources so thin that the Housing Trust Fund would, for all intents and purposes, be closed until the next bond. So we felt like this one was just a bridge too far at this time. That's not to say they wouldn't come back at a future round and maybe with a slightly revised proposal that we would take a close look at for sure. Very last slide. Moving forward, September 25th is when this would be put on for a vote. Financial closings for this, this is always a fairly extended time period. So decisions that council made 2 years ago around affordable housing projects are just now coming online today, for example. So the financial closings are generally within about 3 to 6 months of council approval. And then construction units for these particular 7 projects would be brought online anywhere from 24-25 to early 2026, depending on the nature of the project. So City Manager Jones and Mayor Lyles, with that, I'll stop there and answer any questions.
Thank you. My question is quick. If you could go back to, I'm not sure what slide it is. Can you go back to the slide you were on when we talked about whether or not I had to have questions?
I think it was here.
Forgive me.
Or here.
It was this one.
Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to understand this one. I heard your discussion around why it's before the city of Charlotte. I'm just curious if the town of Matthews will have any, outside of that consortium that you mentioned, is there any formal action that they need to take?
So the site is zoned appropriately, and I'm not aware that there's any additional action that would be necessary other than cobbling together the financing plan. And you can see here with the leverage ratio, this would be a rather small part of the overall financing. Yeah.
All right, Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, Sean, I heard District 1 a ton.
Yeah.
Which is great. And as you were talking, I was just sort of doing some back of the envelope calculations. So of the 822 units you are recommending that we bring online, 446 of them will be in District 1. There's roughly 54% of the entire base. And of the total 7 projects, 4 of them are in District 1, which is great. And I like to see the mix and the balance here. I just have a couple questions for you. For the Avalon Legacy duets, the affordability period is the lowest of all of the projects. Can you speak a little about that? Because I'm very interested in, as you mentioned, Dr. Watlington is speaking about homeowners being able to unlock the benefit of home ownership.
Right.
So can you speak about why that is so low, the lowest of the entire portfolio?
Yes, I will. And as one very quick detour, I would mention that from cycle to cycle, sometimes we'll see, and maybe not necessarily to this degree, but District 3, I can recall in the past, has had a lot of projects in a particular cycle, or District 4. We did actually internally run some analysis recently where we have a little heat map that shows dots for every city-supported affordable housing project since 2002. And there's reasonably good dispersion across Districts 1 through 5, and then District 6 and 7, not as much given the cost of land in those areas. But I did just want to acknowledge that it's something we're sensitive to. And then more direct to your question. So as I mentioned before, with this particular slide, sometimes there's a little bit of an apples and oranges dynamic here, because I wouldn't necessarily compare home ownership to new multifamily construction, other than the fact that they're both activating on affordable housing goals. But with home ownership, with new multifamily construction, whereas we have a 40-year minimum requirement now, with home ownership, the minimum requirement is 15 years. And that's historically what we've seen for many of our home ownership investments through the Housing Trust Fund over the last 5 years. And as I mentioned before, it's a balancing act between wanting to have as long an affordability period as possible, but at the same time not undercutting the ability of the homeowner to extract value from that home through equity, like everyone else would do, but for the deed restriction placed on this house. So that's a long-winded way of saying that I would suggest that for home ownership, 15 isn't low. It certainly looks low compared to these other ones, but there's a little bit of an apples and oranges dynamic. And what I'm looking forward to in January is really doing some comparison and some contrasting, and maybe even talking about pros and cons to the extent possible. Because if you think about the housing support grants, where we have the Westside Community Land Trust and some of the things that they're trying to advance around homeownership, affordability, and perpetuity, I think it'd be great to get under the hood on that and really understand, well, what does that look like for the city and for the homeowner compared to a scenario like this where we're looking at 15 years affordability. I would also mention that we didn't want to overly complicate the slide, but in addition to the 15-year affordability restriction, for years 16 through 30, there will also be a right of first refusal associated with this, whereby the city could step in, buy the house at market value, and then turn it back in and kind of recycle it back into the community at an affordable level. So in a way, you could say it's really like a 30-year requirement.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
And then of the 7 projects that are up on the board, you mentioned we have displacement occurring for 17 residents at the Central at Old Concord site. Do any of the other projects have displacement at all?
They do not.
Okay. And then can you just speak a little bit about the community engagement for those 17 residents that reside in those mobile homes?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. So for any projects for any project submissions that come to us through the Housing Trust Fund RFP, we require community engagement. So and it's very specific, any residents that live within a certain radius of the site, any homeowners associations that are within a certain radius of the site. And we require that community engagement be done in advance of the scheduled date for the council's vote. So many of these have already done their community engagement for this particular project. In conversations with the developer, we've indicated that we need the community engagement done no later than September 20th, because when we provide information to council in the HTF booklet on September 21st, either in that booklet or as supplemental, we want to be able to shine a light on the nature of the community feedback that's received at that session. So you have that information in front of you in advance of the vote.
Excellent. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that it's clear that those 17 families who live there will have plenty of time to engage in the project that's coming aboard. And then lastly, I just wanted to lift up Ascent and their involvement in the Swan Run project that's within District 7. You know, Ascent is a great NOAA partner for us, and they were at the helm of the Charlotte Woods and another District 1 project in Pepper Tree and now Swan Run. And 30% of those units will be for 30% AMI and below. They have some of the lowest rents in the entire market, and this property has actually been potentially sold twice to be demolished and have luxury apartments built on that site. So this is yet another opportunity for us to protect nearly 100 units for affordable housing in District 7, which has been a struggle for us to historically do. So I just want to thank Ascent for their partnership and what we're doing with your team, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. I want to add to Ms. Anderson's questions about the Avalon information. You know, when we work with Habitat and we fund them, they have a policy around how they utilize home ownership as well. So I'd like for us to at least survey our partners so that we stay in sync, not necessarily completely in sync, but at least understand what other people are doing in these models around home ownership that have been successful. So if we just do a little bit of work before the committee begins that discussion, that would be great. All right, and so our next request is from Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I'll be quick. I think that extra column, city cost per unit per year, while it might turn it into more of an eye test, I think that's very helpful. It illuminates it. You know, honestly, it even goes even further. You know, monthly kind of subsidy, it makes it, I don't know, it just illuminates it a lot more versus the cost per unit. You know, that just brings clarity even to me. Quick question about the competitive 9% proposal. That tax credit already been
I don't believe that one's been awarded yet, but I'm looking at Warren for confirmation.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Ajmira?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A couple of questions, Sean. Great presentation. Appreciate the work that you, Warren, and your entire team is doing. If you go back to slide where we have Arrowwood Homes, slide number 8, where you have city-owned land valued at $1.3 million, is that already factored into the investment per unit cost?
Yes, and last year with a few of these scenarios, I recall members of council being clear with me that when we're presenting these, that we needed to show an all-in reflection of the value the city's providing. So yes, it does.
Yes, that's great. Yeah, I had requested that to really give us, so we are comparing apples to apples here. To follow up on Ms. Anderson's question earlier about affordability period for Avalon Legacy in Druid Hills, I have, from what I recall, when we have Habitat for Humanity, to Mayor's point, was it 30 years affordability period that we had approved for homeownership opportunity?
We've had, I recall we at a recent cycle, there may have been one Habitat project and one Dream Key project, and we've seen 15 and 30 years from different partners. But as I mentioned before, some of it is just, we're still struggling with the best way to present this, because with the right of first refusal, arguably I could put 30 years on here with an asterisk to better explain what the 30 years really means.
So I just wanted to sort of, there's a lot to untangle here, because certainly home ownership is very different than some of these rental opportunities. I understand when you shared how you want residents to harvest the equity that they will build over the 15 years. So my question is, let's say if we have 30-year affordability period, does that stay with the same resident, or would we have given another resident an opportunity at home ownership? Because when we are out in the community, the question we often get asked is, hey, I've been in the waiting list for far too long, and we have over 30,000 people in our waiting list, and that waiting list continues to increase year over year as home values go up, interest rates are going up. I'm trying to figure out a way where we continue to allow homeowner an opportunity to build equity, but at the same time, we are trying to create opportunities for new residents and trying to really address that long waiting list that we have, and how do we balance that? I look forward to having that conversation in January, but I think it will help for me to understand how does this really work? And where does the homeownership transition,
right,
where we can allow next resident to have a shot at homeownership?
I agree, and in fact, I think in January, one of the things we want to do is actually look at specific scenarios. Homeowner buys it in year 0 or year 1, and what if they sell in year 10 or in year 20? What are the implications for the homeowner? What restrictions are there in terms of the house being resold to an affordable homeowner or not? So to kind of go through it on a scenario by scenario basis.
Yes, I think that will help me understand where we should land on affordability period when it comes to homeownership. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Mayfield?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for this presentation, Mr. Heath. I have a couple of questions for you. One, I want to go back. Recently, I've had conversations with both single-family and commercial, developers. Part of the challenge that I'm hearing is on our end, the fees that we have in development, and there's not necessarily a tier system as far as if you're building a duet versus the fees that are identified for sewer and water if you're building a 6 to 8 bedroom home. So when we're allocating funds for development, is that taking into consideration the fees that we have on developments, or are we working with our partners to help create a more affordable product?
I probably can't give a full answer to that question. It's the sort of thing I'll need to touch base with members of my team and follow up with you on. But at least for the gap financing scenarios, to the extent that we are providing housing trust fund dollars to a project, that means that their sources and uses of funds match up on a one-for-one basis. So it's enabling them to address all costs, hard costs, soft costs, everything. Developer fees would just be one component of that. But I'll get back with you with a more thorough answer because I don't really have anything additional.
So I think that would be helpful in that January conversation to actually look at what are all of our developmental fees that have been identified through the most recent plan adopted by council, and seeing where we have more opportunity there if it is our fees that's causing some of the additional financial costs. Also, with any of these NOAAs, do you know if any of these NOAA addresses have ever previously received funding? I remember a number of years ago, we had a challenge where the apartment complex will be sold, whether it's sold to a family member or to a cousin. The name changed, the address doesn't, the people receiving the funding doesn't, but we still had challenges in those developments. So are any of these NOAAs any addresses that previously have received funding from the city? Because I know one of them was built in the 70s.
So the NOAA project that's presented tonight has never received city funding through the trust fund.
Not just through the trust fund, period.
Period, yeah.
That's what I want to clarify. Also, a follow-up on the questions my colleagues asked for the Central and Old Concord. That's where we're potentially going to be relocating. You said the current individuals live in trailer. Are those rental trailer homes?
Yes, they are. They're all rentals.
So I think what I heard, or maybe it's just what I wanted to hear because we hear what we want to hear, is an opportunity where we know historically with these wait lists, each development creates their own wait list. You and I, Mr. Wooden and I had plenty of conversations over the years about this idea of a master wait list, because you have people that have been out there 5-7 years, and you have residents who move into the city 3 months, 6 months, and they're already in a brand new development. Do you know if there's a opportunity, since this particular developer has committed to a relocation plan as well as relocation assistance, to either identify housing within, since they have a total of 200 units for the individuals there, versus the idea of we'll relocate you somewhere else if they're building something new?
It's possible, but I think it's too soon to say, and it's one reason why I'm glad that one of the first steps in the process is to do the one-on-one interviews, because really a lot of it boils down to what are the individual needs and desires of a particular household, and with a navigation referral consultant by their side trying to evaluate what are the best options for that particular household, whether it be staying in a mobile park scenario in a different location or moving to another form of affordable housing.
So we know it can be 2 to 3 years, 2 to 5 years for a development to be completed. I think we have an opportunity, if we're really going to assist residents that are being relocated, then we have projects that we have approved within the last 3 to 5 years that are just coming out the ground now, that are just getting ready to open up. While they're creating their own wait list, I think the city has an opportunity on the front end to be more proactive and identify, because we already have all their information, the individuals that through our approvals are being displaced, to get them in direct communication with some of these new developments that are going to have their ribbon cuttings or already have started moving people in within the next 2 to 6 months, versus waiting for a project that's 2+ years down the line. We already have some projects that are coming out the ground. That may be an opportunity for us to be proactive on the front end. I appreciate you breaking down for the Matthews property and that the county does have some money. You did not share how much, but I appreciate the fact that this is not just the city.
Right.
Looking at HUD funds, when you go to the Kings on Lamar development, with as far as our investment for those, our men that are experiencing homelessness, I'm glad that we're at that place. But of course, you know I'm gonna have questions for you on Abilene, of which my colleagues have already had a couple. I appreciate the fact that it's ownership and that they are duets. It is still mind-blowing to me that you're looking at $260,000 to $285,000 for half a home, but that's the place we're in today. What is the language on the front end for how long owner occupancy needs to be? Because 1 year, 2 years is not enough. We saw the impact in Bright Walk. We saw when we made investments, because you have individuals that know how to target vulnerable community. So if we don't have language in place for a minimum of, say, 3 to 5 years of owner occupancy of that original owner, one, to keep investors out, because if that language is written in the deed, you have less chance of it being an investor, you have less chance of that home being flipped, and you have less chance of someone basically being convinced out of their home. So someone might offer them $280,000 or $300,000 on the house, which sounds like a good bit of funds, until you need to go somewhere else. And we've already seen the impact where we've made investments throughout the city, and a number of those residents don't live there today because we didn't put certain language in to not only protect our investment, but to protect our residents that are sometimes vulnerable. So do you know what the minimum of what the language is going to say for owner occupancy?
Maureen's giving me hand signals.
It's 30 years.
No, for the person that, when I buy this, when I'm applying for this loan, is the deed going to state minimum owner occupied 3 years, 5 years, versus not having any language? Because we've seen where individuals have received access, but then 2 years later, they're not in that home, and they're now back in our system needing assistance. Because there's a difference, even when you think of a HOA, how a number of communities have been able to minimize the impact of investors is they've updated their HOA language to say this must be owner occupied for a minimum of 3, 4, or 5 years, and that's kept investors out of it. So do we know if we have, because we're not going to tell someone you got to live here for 30 years, but are we saying that owner occupancy, there's a minimum in the
Manager
deed?
Jones and Mayor Laus, can I invite Mr. Wooten to a microphone to answer the question?
Sure, but I think Ms. Mayfield's point is accurate. I think that some of the institutions that we've had have gone through this, and we have had, in Belmont particularly, the Habitat houses were sold. So that's why I asked, we ought to survey people that have got this in place, not just in Charlotte, but where other places are that are high growth communities where they're dealing with affordable housing, because it is a real question and people need to have clarity. So, Mr. Wooten.
Yeah, Ward Wooten, Housing and Neighborhood Services. Ms. Mayfield, there's 2 restrictions on the property. There's the initial restriction that goes to the buyer that they sell it to. So in that language, for 15 years, it has to be sold to an owner occupant at or below 80% of AMI. There's a second restriction that's going to be recorded against these properties. It is a 30-year restriction. That 30-year restriction is your right of first refusal, which means the city can buy it back. And it is a prohibition to renting the property. So for 30 years, these properties will be only allowed to be sold to owner occupants, and the city will maintain and watch that with our asset management group.
So I appreciate the additional part that you just added, regarding the properties not being able to be a rental, because I
Correct.
guess I missed that part.
For 30 years.
And I apologize, Mr. Heath, if I missed that part in the beginning, because at the end of the day, if we have the opportunity to try to protect residents based off what we've seen, because we can go into Bright Walk today and see that a number of those homes have flipped hands in a relatively short period of time, that defeats our investment goals to make sure that we're protecting residents and giving them access to the resources to maintain ownership. So I appreciate that what you're telling me and what we're getting in the minutes is that there is a clear expectation on the front end that these are to be owner occupied and that there is a minimal time period so that we don't see house flipping happening in this particular situation. And that was all that I have for you, so
All right,
thank you
we
very
have
much.
Mr. Driggs.
Thank you, Mayor. So Swan Run, I'm grateful that there was some money for District 7 and it didn't all go to District 1. I'm interested, though, it looks like there are some sort of low-level structures there. Is this all going to be repurposing existing buildings? There's no expansion or new construction?
That's correct. It's all repurposing existing buildings, and with the total development cost, there's about 1.8 million in renovation, and the balance of it is the acquisition itself.
Right. Are there any other subsidies aside from the 2.4 million?
From any source?
Yes.
Okay, so the capital stack includes the pursuit of funding from CHOIF. Charlotte Housing Opportunity Investment Fund. LISC has been a great partner with us in the past. This particular project does not include funding from the county. Generally speaking, the city-county collaborations on NOAAs will be for the larger, more like transformational size kind of NOAAs.
So do we know how much is coming from CHOIF?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but Mark has shared it with me
Let me know
before.
when you can.
Okay.
And then, does this deal have all of the same features of some of our prior transactions with Ascent? Is there
It does.
a tax angle?
It does. It would be modeled in the same fashion as the previous deals. Correct.
And they also have a provision about special services or for the lowest income people there. Is that right? Same deal?
Yes, the community health worker model will be embedded in this community. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Bakari.
Just a real quick question. For the home ownership one, why not do some little like encumbrance on the property and then if they sell after 15 years, take out the city subsidy to refill the pot back for the next investment?
I'm not sure if that's different than what's contemplated here. If there's a scenario beyond year 15 where there's a sale that occurs to a household above 80% AMI,
After 15 years, they can sell it at market rate, right?
Right, and then we have the right of first refusal, so we could choose to be that buyer, or an agent of the city could choose to be that buyer.
What if they decide to sell it for 2 times the value that you don't agree with?
So I think under the Dream Key model, the emphasis is on, once you get beyond the 15-year horizon, there is an opportunity for that owner to harvest equity based on wherever market prices are.
I totally agree. I like that. What I'm saying is, if the city had 25 or 30,000 or whatever, how much in it, why wouldn't we, if we're going to have a sustainable model, every year if you do that, by the time 15 years comes, all of a sudden, every year, as people sell, that original money, they might sell it for $100,000 more, 30,000 comes back to the city, they keep 70, and that money can now be deployed, and then you've got a rolling capability.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I keep referring to January, but a lot of these models have the shared equity component in it, where there's a piece of that equity that the owner takes, and then there's a piece that's left behind in the project in order for it to be retained at affordable levels going forward. So I think that's what you're referring to, would be like shared equity.
I'm not trying to make that unit retained affordability overall. I'm trying to figure out sustainable ways to keep the housing trust fund populated over time. And if somebody is, the homeownership one is the most exciting one, potentially, where it might go, but you've got to figure out some way to make that funding possible because it's going to cost.
Right.
So just something to think about.
Okay, thank you.
And is that in the committee discussion that you're going to be having, Ms. Watlington? Mm-hmm. Okay.
That model would be good, Madam Chair.
All right. Mr. Heath?
Thank you.
Good. You got all that you need and more. So, I think that we're going to do in the manager's report, we're going to talk about the corridors at that time. And so why don't we go downstairs? It's 6:30, and that's what time we're supposed to start. Thank you all that are joining us for the city council meeting, those that are in the chamber, those that are watching us streaming online or on the city's YouTube channel, that we want to say welcome. We will begin with our call to order for this meeting. We are going to really address several issues, but let's begin our meeting with introductions of people at the dais, and we'll start with our city attorney.
Good evening, Patrick Baker, City Attorney.
Good evening, Victoria Watlington, District 3.
Good evening, Dante Anderson, District 1.
Tara Pakari, District 6.
Braxton Winston, Mayor Pro Tem.
Vi Lau serving as mayor.
Good evening, LaWanna Mayfield, council member at large.
Good evening on this Monday, James Mitchell at large.
Good evening, Dimple Ajmera at large.
Billy Tons, Deputy City Clerk.
Okay. We begin our meeting with an invocation. We do this in respect for our invocation and our ability to come and think about how we can work together and to solemnize our proceedings. Please do so. We'll follow that with following the invocation, we will have a pledge of allegiance to our flag, and again, if you choose to participate. Tonight, we're asking Councilmember Driggs. Sorry, Mr. Driggs.
It's red carpet moment.
I know. To provide us our words of expression or invocation.
Thank you, Mayor. Today is September 11th, 2023, 22 years to the day since the most devastating terrorist attack in history. On that fateful day, the World Trade Center in New York was destroyed, the Pentagon was attacked, and nearly 3,000 innocent people died. Most of us who are old enough to remember vividly where we were when we first got word of the plane hitting the South Tower and how our horror grew as the second tower was struck and the buildings then collapsed. We wince when we remember the dreadful images of that day, but most of us were eventually able to carry on with our lives because our great country was stunned but ultimately not deterred by the events of 9/11. We kept calm and we carried on. For some, however, the pain of that day is still current. The course of lives of the loved ones of the victims changed permanently. They have had to learn to live with an empty space where one of the most important people in their lives used to be. We should keep those who continue to feel a personal loss in our thoughts and prayers. Let us also recall that among those who died that day were 343 members of the New York City Fire Department and 71 law enforcement officers. They fearlessly rushed in as others rushed out, and many were caught inside when the towers collapsed. Today, let us recognize their bravery and sacrifice and honor them along with all first responders who have protected us at peril to themselves right up until this day. Thanks to the engagement of our men and women in uniform and security services, we have not had a major terrorist incident in this country since 9/11. Let us also give thanks to them. Finally, we should take this opportunity to appreciate how actions of the worst people can bring out the best in good people. At a board meeting of the Visited Nurse Service of New York, a large nonprofit home nursing agency, my colleagues and I received a report of the activity of the nurses who had urgently visited patients in Lower Manhattan following the attack, concerned that many were homebound and frightened or exposed to harm from the smoke and dust. One crew of 50 nurses went out for 3 8-hour shifts in a row to look after their patients. When they met at headquarters after the third shift, grimy and tired, their supervisor told them to go home and to get some rest before they tired themselves out. Every single one went right back out to tend to more patients. On this anniversary of 9/11, may we all comfort those who still feel the pain of personal loss, and let us commit that the collective courage and kindness of our nation will always shelter us from the actions of those who wish us harm. Let us not forget. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Driggs. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance if you choose. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Tonight, we'll begin with our first public hearing. We're now going to open a public hearing regarding the issuance of general obligation refunding bonds not to exceed $235 million to fund street and neighborhood improvement projects. Do we have any speakers, Madam Clerk? If we do have any speakers, so we will,
Motion to close the public hearing.
do I have a motion to close the public hearing in a second? Any
Second.
discussion? All in favor, please raise your hand. That's unanimous. Anyone opposed? I guess you're not with unanimous vote. All right, so now, if we could have a motion to adopt the bond order and resolution to provide for the issuance of general obligation refunding bonds not to exceed $235 million, adopt a budget ordinance appropriating same amount in bond proceeds to the Municipal Service Debt Fund, as well as adopt a resolution authorizing a bond anticipation note for up to $200 million to be used for projects approved in the 2018 and 2020 referendum, and authorize the city officials to make the necessary actions to complete the financing, including making the application to the local government commission. Do I have a
To
motion?
approve A, B, C, D, E, and adopt.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the city manager's report, and Mr. Jones, I'm going to recognize you.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. I sent out a 30-day memo earlier today. We originally had planned on speaking with you about the digital inclusion during the manager's report. We believe it makes more sense to have this discussion on October the 9th, which actually opens up an opportunity for us to catch up on an item that we had for the action briefing that we didn't have a chance to get to, the corridors of opportunity, which was in the ED committee earlier this month, with a plan to have a larger discussion tonight. I know during that committee discussion, many of you had questions and were willing to hold off until tonight. So, Mayor, if there aren't any questions, I'd like to invite Monica Holmes down.
All right. Ms. Holmes?
Okay, good evening. How are you guys doing?
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm going to give them just a second to pull up my presentation, and I'll go ahead and get started while that is happening. So as you know, we were in front of committee last week at the Jobs and Economic Development Committee, and you'll see some of the same information, but with more depth to it. So let's get started. So tonight, I'm going to give you a broad overview, go through where we are in 2023, some corridors updates, talk through our upcoming initiatives and projects, and then next steps and what we will be doing in the coming years. Can you all, you can't see it. Can you see it?
Now we can.
Now you can. Okay, great, good. I saw the looks that it did not look like it was working. So, as a reminder, Corridors of Opportunity is in its third year, and we have been working through infrastructure projects, public-private partnerships, and a variety of programs to about $72 million of city investment. So again, as a reminder, if people are not familiar with what the Corridors of Opportunity program is, it supports investment in 6 historically underinvested corridors. And the core goals of the program are to foster thriving communities, to build lasting legacy, and to grow our community equitably. The core of the program is to support existing businesses, residents, and community members to grow economically with more opportunity. There are 6 corridors: West Boulevard, Freedom Wilkinson, Beatties Ford, Russell's Ferry, Sugar Creek and 85, Graham North Tryon, and Central Albemarle. So at the beginning of 2023, we came to you and told you a little bit about what our goals were for the year. And our goals were really focused around continuing to build partnerships, focusing on implementation in Sugar Creek and Albemarle, getting into project prioritization and completing the playbooks for Graham North Tryon, and Wilkinson Freedom, and to build a more robust community engagement and communication effort, and really get into the meat of the corridor's work. So I'm happy to say that we have been moving forward on all fronts with that work, and I'll talk a little bit about these individually as I get through this tonight. So as a framework for corridors, our work and our structure, both internally and externally, and how we collaborate across departments is focused around the framework for the Charlotte Future 2040 plan. So there are 10 goals in that plan. There are 6 that we work, we call them work streams and themes in corridors, and we collaborate across those. There are 3 or more city county departments in each one, and we're moving forward with implementation across all 6 of those. So you can see here what an example of programs and projects and partnerships in each of those buckets are. So you'll see things like the placemaking projects in West Boulevard and Beatty's Ford, which I'll talk about a little bit tonight, transportation projects, our strategic acquisitions, some of the support we're doing for Spanish language businesses, SafeBiz, our camera pilot program, and Corridors Connect Road to Hire, which you just voted on. So I really want to recognize some of the great partners externally that are doing this work in partnership with us. So you'll see actually up here in the audience tonight, we have Rusty Mills with Blisk and Catherine Furman Sellers with United Way and Tracy Russ with the Foundation for the Carolinas, representing that Wells Fargo Beyond Open piece, and really our partner in the work. So the things that the city are not experts at, these are the experts helping us to fill those gaps and to do some of the really human needs work, working on supporting small business with Beyond Open, working to leverage our dollars with LISC, and helping us really achieve the bigger goal. So we call it our big hairy goal. Our team here at the city has set a big goal over the next 3 years of raising $100 million, both privately and through federal grants, in addition to the city's funding. So we're well on our way with that, but we just want to really thank our partners and the close relationship we have with them to help us reach that bigger, broader goal. So now I'm just going to quickly go corridor by corridor as to where we are. Again, some of these we talked about last week, some we didn't, but you'll hear a little bit deeper into how we are doing the work. So first, North Tryon, North Graham, we finished that playbook in the winter of last year. We are focused on implementing projects and focusing on how we build the employment hub that is North Tryon, North Graham, leveraging some of the great projects like Camp North End, some of the great things that we're seeing happen in the North Tryon corridor, and making sure that that corridor is still strong, connecting people to jobs, housing, and that we are not displacing that community. So a lot of the work we're doing in that corridor is focused on providing opportunity and connectivity to those existing residents. So the Freedom and Wilkinson Drive corridor, we're actually in the middle of a playbook process right now for that corridor. We welcome people to get involved with that work. We had the kickoff August 24th. There were approximately 65 to 70 people at that kickoff. You can see some of the photos here from that meeting. We're partnering with some local organizations to do some creative engagement as part of the process. And you see we'll be done in the winter with that corridor playbook, and then we'll start working on implementation. So in Albemarle Road, we finished that playbook in summer of 2022. We quickly moved from the playbook into what we call the roadmap, which is really our strategic 3-year, how we're doing the work. And you can see some of those projects starting to take shape now. We have the city property that was sold earlier this year. I just want to point out here that there are other investments we're leveraging in that corridor, like the Umbrella Center, the Pepper Tree NOAA partnership, Prospera, which is funded from Corridors of Opportunity, which is a small business cohort to support. It's our first in-language program as a city where we've done it in another language to support small business. We have a staying in place pilot community there. We have some exciting work that'll kick off in this winter, spring around what we call the Albemarle Cultural Trail. We have a big investment going on in our sidewalk gaps, which I'll show in just a minute. And then we've been working with some other partners like the YMCA in the area on what their future programming and planning looks like. So in West Boulevard, I want to focus on, you'll see later tonight, the Three Sisters Market and the work that's starting to happen there. We also are working on our parcel, the strategic acquisition parcel, starting to review those proposals and really understanding what that redevelopment will look like. We are going to continue to support the Merchants Association. Our staff has been participating in their meetings, and they are getting ready to kick off a membership drive, which is very exciting. They're also participating in what we call the Breaking Barriers to Business program, which is a partnership with Truist and Main Street America. They participated in a legacy project around the intersection of West Boulevard and Remount, which we have some great planning work that was the result of that. And then multiple partnerships with placemaking. You'll see a little bit around those projects when I dive into those. And then finally, last but definitely not least, is the Beatties Ford Road Corridor. That is our first corridor that we launched with implementation a couple years ago, and it's been really special to see the organic evolution of city-driven work with community support to now community-driven work with city support. So we are helping Historic West End Partners, Washington Heights, the Alternatives to Violence team, really giving them the staffing and support that they ask for around specific projects and partnerships that they're putting together. So they are really leading the work, and we are just helping along the way where we need to help put those pieces together. So really great work happening in Beatties Ford, and it's interesting to see what the evolution years later looks like. So around the strategic acquisitions, there were 3 city-acquired parcels that we had all the requests for proposals due August 31st. We received 10 applications. We had four applications for the Double Oak site, 3 applications for the Economy Inn site, and 3 applications for the West Boulevard site. We are currently in review of those. They're all for different uses. As you can see here, the Double Oak site is mixed residential with community input. Again, each of the applications is a little different. We're just starting to get into those. West Boulevard and Remount is more focused on the commercial side. And then the Economy Inn is for sale residential affordable housing. So with the Economy Inn, if anybody is driven by the Sugar Creek intersection this week, the Economy Inn no longer exists. It has been demolished. We finished up the asbestos abatement towards the beginning of last week. We have really moved quickly, and I'm very proud of our city team, the project managers that have taken lead of it, to move fast and be responsive to that community. So we also are focused on opportunity hubs. We had a grant open. It's for our community partners based in corridors that focus around small businesses, jobs, and entrepreneurship. We had an open application for about 6 weeks. We received 21 applications. We're currently reviewing those and working with our team on figuring out the right partnerships and getting through those applications. It's going to be exciting work. There will be a physical location in each corridor, and it'll provide us the opportunity to have a home base for other resources too, and other partners to work together in each corridor. So more to come on those. You will see more about the opportunity hubs as we continue to move them forward. The Emerging Developer Training Program, you will see that in the coming weeks as well as we move forward with that proposed partnership with LISC and some private partners. This program is focused on building more diversity in our commercial real estate industry and getting developers up and running to really scale from smaller projects to bigger projects. It will be a cohort model, and we'll be able to have mentors mentors that are not just from the Charlotte area, but from regional and even nationally. And we also have, LISCA's been working hard on getting private funding into this training program, as well as getting extra dollars for projects to get off the ground for recent graduates. So exciting work there. And I'm going to quickly, these are some new things I just wanted to showcase that are in work streams outside of just that diverse and resilient economy. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the creating special places, which these might be smaller projects, but they're very meaningful to the community. We have a project in West Boulevard that we've been working hard with the West Boulevard neighborhood group on to do some historic markers. And there's a local artist that was actually born and raised in the West Boulevard corridor who is helping us with these. We've been working closely with NCDOT, and they will be completed fairly soon. In the Beatties Ford corridor, we have a partnership with the library and the Knight Foundation to fund public space in front of the Allegra Westbrooks Library, which the library will program. And the artist who is working on this project is a Northwest School of the Arts graduate. And then we also have some enhancements happening at the Beatties Ford and LaSalle intersection in conjunction with Historic Weston Partners. So interesting things happening there. In the North Tryon, North Graham corridor, we received a $260,000 grant from the Lowe's Foundation to build in a partnership between our urban design team and the urban forestry team to build the Urban Arboretum Trail, which are taking remnant city properties that are really not able to be used for anything else and adding tree canopy to a community that lacks trees. So there will be 3 separate properties, and this will be a very quick project. It will have the ribbon cutting later this fall, and we will have a lovely public space that people in the community can enjoy while seeing the new trees, very specific species that are special to North Carolina. So in the mobility front, we are really focused around prioritizing pedestrians and cyclists who are trying to get to jobs and resources. So most of our transportation projects and corridors are focused on safety. These are high injury corridors, and we are working diligently to leverage federal dollars to make our dollars go further with our transportation projects. So as you can see here, we have been able to win $16.2 million federal dollars for about $15 million locally on projects. So I think we're doing pretty well. And this is an example you'll see below on the Albemarle Road corridor, what a project looks like. So what we are doing is we are taking several projects and making sure that they connect to places and where people want to go. So it's not just what we would call a safe crossing, but it's a safe crossing that gets to a sidewalk connection that gets to a new bus stop. So again, that theme of leveraging our federal dollars. We're also very proud to be a part of the Thriving Communities program, which is a bonus program for federal dollars for the next 3 years. So the Corridors of Opportunity program is participating in the Thriving Communities Network, where we will get special technical assistance, and we get bonus points on every grant that we apply for. So very exciting. We actually have our kickoff this week for this program, and Liskin United Way are also our partners in that program. And so we will be doing some community-based work to help identify projects and then go after federal grants to build them. So across housing, you just heard a lot about housing from Sean, so maybe we need to keep it light on this. But again, you saw some of the projects earlier, but I just want to reiterate that it is very cross-collaborative. So, we have some great projects in that recent round of Housing Trust Fund that are in our corridors. We're working on that Staying in Place pilot with our Housing and Neighborhood Services team. And then we have a couple of the strategic acquisitions that we'll be working on at Double Oaks and the Economy Inn that'll provide some housing options. So Getting towards the end here, I just want to talk a little bit about Corridors Connect, which is going to be a great opportunity for us all to connect with our corridors communities in October 8th, the 15th, and the 22nd. We will have, it's basically a neighborhood-based open streets event where the community is invited to come. There will be food trucks, activities. We're giving community activation grants that is actively open. So if community groups would like to participate, we will be providing $500 for groups to rent a bounce house, give out popsicles, whatever you think is the appropriate activity for your community. We also can provide information for people who are interested in getting involved. These events are in partnership with the county, Partners for Parks, and Public Health. We're very excited about this. And again, we're just getting the word out there. We'll be doing press later this week. The activities will happen on Sundays from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. on those dates. There will be 2 each weekend. I put the website up here so people could go to Open Street 704 for more information. Here are some fun images of all the things that we hope to see people doing at the Corridors Connect event, painting the street, chalk, dancing, having a good time. And then to finish up, I just want to take the time to say what we're looking forward to and what we'll be moving towards in 2024. And then I'm going to finish with the last but not least, but a success story from our Sugar Creek corridor. So as we move forward into 2024, we are focused on continuing to grow. If you'll see that common theme, our private investment and to build our partnerships. We're focusing implementation across all 6 corridors. We are working to get those community groups up, running, strengthened so that they're doing the work, which we know they are. We will finish out that prioritizing projects and will consent in freedom. And then again, continuing our communications effort. One other thing we're really focusing on in the next coming months too is how we're measuring success with the program. So I just want to shout out a little bit to United Way, as I think we'll be working a little closer together on how we're measuring their program and our program and where there's intersection points so that we really can see what our impact is. So I think more to come on that front, and I'll be happy to come back with those things as we continue to move forward. And then last, I just want to point out how all these different theme projects, different corridor work can all work together to really add up to us starting to move the needle towards success. So you can see here in the Sugar Creek corridor, those different highlighted things on the map are different projects across all 6 themes. So we have a couple of placemaking grant recipients in the corridor doing work in Derrida and in the Hidden Valley part of the Sugar Creek corridor. We have things like streetlight upgrades. We've been making inroads, building a business association, opportunity hub. We know will happen in this corridor. We just were the recipients of the RAISE grant, which we'll be working on. There's strong community partnerships already happening. And then we obviously have some of the hotel redevelopment occurring. And really what all that has done has been able for us to leverage and layer all these things to work towards a safer, stronger Sugar Creek corridor that's done with the community and not to the community. So I'm really proud of this work. We always have more work to do. I think that you will continue to see the nonprofits working in the corridor continue to grow and continue to prosper and continue to be our partners in the work. And I also just want to make sure, we talked about this in committee, but that we recognize the fact that we have invested estimated about $10 million in the corridor, or scheduled about that much. And we've already seen over $22 million of private investment. We've been able to reduce the hotel rooms through the work and the partnership with people like Hill Charlotte, with we have some private interest in the hotel rooms with our investment in the hotels. And if you add all that up, it's about a 38% reduction. So great work happening there. The Sugar Creek Business Association has a full seated board. And we just look to see the work in this corridor continue to grow. So I'll end on that positive note. And if we have time for any questions, I welcome them.
Mr. Jones?
So, Mayor, that's thank you so much. And we keep lifting up the corridors as this horizontal way that we work within the organization. So very proud of the team and all the work that's going on with corridors, so thank you.
We have a few questions and comments, so we'll start with Ms. Ajmira, followed by Mr. Mitchell and then Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm absolutely proud of the work that Mr. Jones has been done under your leadership. I remember about 3 to 4 years ago, we started talking about corridors of opportunity and historically underinvested areas. And this is a bold step of over $72 million in just 3 years alone. And we are leveraging our funding with with private sector and federal and state funding because we are in this together. It's going to take the federal, state, city working together with the private sector and nonprofits to really move the needle in the right direction. I'm really impressed with the comprehensive approach here, where we are focused not just on the housing, but jobs, opportunities for our small businesses who has been part of the corridors for far too long, but has not seen that type of investment before. Really, I love the environment piece and how we are integrating that because there are many parts of our city, especially these corridors of opportunities where we don't have rich tree canopy. So I love the Arboretum Trail, and hopefully we will continue to expand that while retaining our culture and identity. Every corridor is unique, and it's important that we integrate that as part of our playbook. But I'm really impressed with the work, Monica, that's been done, and I hope that we continue to keep the momentum that is to really invest in these corridors of opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Monica, just two quick takeaways. You can provide this later on. One is, you mentioned there was one slide about private investments, and so I'd like to get a copy of all those who are providing grants, at what level they will be providing grants. That's number one. And number two, I'd like to get a copy of the RFPs that are out there on the street, just to see what criteria did we put in those proposals. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Monica, I just want to congratulate your team for the work. I mean, we love it when a plan comes together, but you guys have really been doing a lot of heavy lifting, and it's evident, of course, in the Sugar Creek corridor. But I do want to make a comment about the North Tryon, North Graham corridor. I had the opportunity, actually, along with the mayor, to attend the grand opening of the Gaston. And, it's a former Charlotte Housing Authority property, Delahaye Courts, that had 36 units that were cinder block walls, no HVAC, really dilapidated. And in that same footprint, there are 144 brand-new apartments that are phenomenal. They're gorgeous apartments, 1 through 3 bedrooms, and still maintaining 36 units for 30% AMI. And the city helped provide gap funding for that project. Otherwise, it would not have come to fruition. And so it's a great example of something we're doing in the corridor where we're collaborating with the county and Olivian to really change a neighborhood and bring it up to 2023 standards. So I want to lift up that work and everything you're doing in the North Graham corridor, especially as it relates to the digital divide and career readiness. So keep up the good work. Congratulations. And I'm looking forward to everything that's coming down the pipeline. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Ms. Mayfield?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Monica, thank you for the presentation and for the opportunity for us to go out and meet with not only some of the business leaders, but also community members regarding what is happening in investment. When I look at the Freedom Wilkerson playbook, I'm hoping that as we're moving forward, for full transparency, you remember I used to have a lot of questions regarding corridors of opportunity, and the basic ones was who were the opportunities for. So you look at Freedom Drive today. So you look at the 8 years when I served as the district rep, and a number of the businesses do not reflect the residents that once lived there. They reflect the residents that live there today, which is a different socioeconomic from a community that had homes right off of Freedom Drive in what was once Westwood Apartments, which were over 650 lower income apartments. New development came in. You now have a community that was once Regal Heights that is now under historic Camp Green that have $700,000 homes in them today. As we're moving forward, I'm hoping we're putting the language in place that is definitely much more targeted to create opportunities, because what I would hope is that we learn the lesson that happened with the Good Life at Enderley Park, because it took a lot of work to get at least one Black-owned business along the Freedom Drive corridor, and in essence, that only Black-owned business was ran out. There was plenty of media attention. People can do their own Google search on it. But that was a major challenge as the former rep of that area, to work hard and thinking that our language was going to encourage one type of development, and then to see the implementation create something that was very different. So we can say unintended consequences. The challenge is now we know better. So the question is, are we going to put the language in place as we move to expand our corridors of opportunity and learn the lessons from the initial investments to ensure that the community who currently lives there, not the community of the future, because we have in here that we're going to engage the community business owners and stakeholders in a concise process to identify priorities. Well, the business owners that are there today are not the ones that were there even 5 years ago. So if there's not diversity in those conversations that truly reflect the neighborhoods, I have a concern that we will be opening the door for more transition than what we're already seeing. So I hope that we can follow up at some point to really look at the impact. And when you look at Tuckasegee, you look at the investments we put in the roundabout that took 6+ years to get the roundabout there. When we look at who is having opportunity, you look at all of the breweries. There's maybe 2 Black-owned businesses that are along Tuckasegee, and one of them is on the other side in the greater Enderley neighborhood. So we have to really, and manager, this is really also a thought for you and your team. How can we be much more conscious with the equity framework that my colleagues previously adopted, to ensure as we move forward with these conversations, we're actually achieving the goals that we're telling the community are our target? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Watlington?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to lift up a couple of quick items. The first one is specific to the goals from the COP 2040 that were called out. And I noticed that 10-minute neighborhoods and neighborhood diversity and inclusion weren't specifically included. So I just wanted to lift up that absolutely I see corridors as a vehicle to achieve those goals, whether by enabling professional services, for instance, where people might have had to travel outside of the neighborhood to get dentist or accountant or whoever. If there are ways that we can support those kinds of businesses within the corridors. Speaking to Councilmember Mayfield's point, I think that certainly contributes to 10-minute neighborhood without it even having to be an infrastructure type of investment. So I just want to make sure that we're making that connection, as well as the neighborhood diversity and inclusion component, because again, to Ms. Mayfield's point, when we're talking about residents that live there now, and even the work that we're doing with anti-displacement and wanting to make sure that residents who have been longtime residents can stay even as we welcome in new residents, I think there's a play there for age and income diversity, to say the least, right? So I just want to make sure that as we think about how important this program is to achieving our goals, that we get the full scope. And then I just wanted to lift up and ask you to talk a little bit. I know we're at the very beginning stages of it, but the corridors work to date has been very place-based and focused around what we can do within the corridors. And now as each of the corridors are in flight in our neighborhood, quarterbacks are talking to each other and our partner agencies are working together, we're now getting to that next level of broader policy type items and talking about how do we not only impact the place, but the people in the corridor. So I just wanted you to provide just a little color on how you think that might look going forward.
So I think, again, we are in the early stages of talking through that. I think one key is that our Neighborhood Investment Advisory Committee works really closely together. So my friends here tonight we all sit on that together, and we really have to understand what each group's role is and how we work together towards our common goal of place and people-based economic development and community development, and then what our lanes are and where we might have intersection in those. So we meet monthly. We can do more to meet more frequently with staff on off topics, and I think we're starting to work through that where appropriate. But I think that's step one, is understanding what everybody's doing and aligning ourselves, which I'm proud to say we're getting there. I mean, Beyond Open is solely focused on corridors of opportunity, small business. LISC work is providing extra impact on the development side, and they're going to work with us on the developer training piece. United Way and all their quarterbacks, we're starting to understand what that is. But I mean, we have work to do, especially in spaces that we as a city don't typically sit in, that are very people-centered. And so we're just figuring out where do we sit in that conversation versus where a partner sits, and then let's understand what each other's role is and how we work together towards the common good. I mean, we have great working relationships with quarterback agencies in almost every corridor, especially ones we're deep in implementation with, like Beatty's Ford, West Boulevard, Sugar Creek, just starting to get there with Albemarle. We'll be kind of getting further in the North Tryon, North Graham corridor, and Freedom Wilkinson, we're right at the tip of it. But so I've talked to some of those agencies to understand kind of where we are in that relationship spectrum, and how we can kind of grow closer to understand roles and who's doing what.
Thank you. And on that note, colleagues, I'd like to request a referral in the form of a policy item to understand what are some of those items. I've got an email in front of me that Freedom Communities, one of our main partners, has sent over that's already outlined several of the policy items, some of which, as Monica mentioned, sit within the city, and some might show up at where we play more of an advocacy role or show up on our legislative agenda. But I'd love to have that conversation within committee, whether it's ED or Neighborhoods Committee, on what those broader policies coming out of our Corridors of Opportunity program might be.
Any other speakers? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you
very
guys.
much for the update. Mr. Jones, anything else? Okay. So the next item on our agenda is a business item. We've gone to our business agenda. Is there a motion for item 8 to approve $1.5 million up from the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund for the West Boulevard Neighborhood Coalition in support of the development of Three Sisters Market, and also including the authorization for the city manager to execute, amend, and renew the contracts as needed? Do I have a motion?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. I believe that's unanimous. All right, thank you. The next item is item number 9. It's housing support grants for nonprofit capacity building support. For item number 9, is there a motion to approve the use of $6.4 million from the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund for the following nonprofit organizations providing projects and programming in support of housing security and stability for low-income residents? Heal Charlotte, $2,250,000. Freedom Fighting Missionaries, $2 million. Westside Community Land Trust, $1,750,000. Charlotte Family Housing, $400,000. To approve the use of $1.1 million in community development block grant funds for rebuilding together of Greater Charlotte in support of housing security and stability. Approve the use of $99,000 from the fund for nonprofit capacity building to be provided by Next Stage Consulting, and authorizing the manager to execute, amend, and renew the contracts as necessary. Do I have a motion? I need a motion on. We have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a second. On the table, we have one speaker, and I would like to ask Mary Ann Stiegel to come down and address. Is she here? Ms. Stiegel? She's not here. All right. She had signed up to speak about the 16-unit townhome complex at the Grove. And so I saw Ms. Molina. Ms. Molina.
Yes, ma'am, Madam Mayor. Thank you so much. I absolutely support item number 9, but I would like to, I've already spoken to my colleagues, and I would like to make a substitute motion.
Please do.
I would like to substitute that we adopt item or action A, B, C, and D, but in action A, I would like to actually request from the council that we move specifically just one Freedom Fighting Missionaries for $2 million to our next business meeting.
Second. We have a motion and a second, a substitute motion and a second that would approve all of the items with the exception of Freedom Fighting Missionaries, which would appear on our next agenda.
Yes, ma'am.
All right? Do we have a motion and a second? Is there any discussion on the substitute? Mr. Winston.
Yeah, I just would, a word to my colleagues. The issues that we're dealing with are vast, and the scale at which we need, the scale and speed at which we need solutions. I fear that sometimes we've already done a lot of good work to get community-driven and community-guided policy that provides staff the opportunity to come back with good solutions. Sometimes, honestly, we kick the can down the road, and that can slow down our staff, our whole organization, from getting wins and continue on to the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. I know this is only 2 weeks, but this is something that I've noticed happens often, more often than I would like personally, and we should just be cognizant of that. We, at the government level, at this municipal level, certainly can only be one small part in the solution to providing that scale, but a lot of folks fall in line when we make very deliberate and strong moves. And likewise, other folks, other partners that we depend on for scalable solutions to this will kind of hold back when we take our time. So I understand that there's a few folks in the community that have had some concerns, and there's certainly no issue with talking, but we can do both at the same time. So I would just, again, urge us to continue to push forward wherever we can, as fast as we can, because as fast as we can go, it's never going to be fast enough for our constituents out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion, Ms. Molina?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. And to my colleague, that point is absolutely not wasted on me. But what I want to lift up, and the purpose for my requesting from my colleagues to consider this motion with me is because we actually made the decision in committee, and we're making it with federal funding. And so I want to offer and I do plan to be present. And I do realize that this is delay. I have talked to Kenny personally, and I did share his rebuttal with the whole of council to show that he is 100% on board, that the community members are 100% on board, and I want to communicate out loud that this isn't a denial, this is just a delay, so that we can make sure that there's clarity, around what is actually happening. I feel like that there's some fear because there's not enough knowledge that's been exchanged, so I really want to offer the opportunity to have that happen and then offer that to you all so that we can make a decision as a council on the next business meeting.
Thank you. And I don't see any further discussion, so we have a substitute motion on the table. All in favor of the substitute motion, please raise your hand. Anyone opposed? All right, that's unanimous. All right. The next item on our agenda is grants for Alternatives to Violence Alternatives to Violence program, authorizing the city manager or his designee to accept a grant in the amount of $1 million from the U.S. Department of Justice Fund to fund continued implementation of our Alternatives to Violence program and adopt a budget ordinance appropriating same amount. Do I have a motion?
Move to approve A and B and adopt.
Do we have a second? Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor, please raise your hand. Anyone opposed? I think it's unanimous. Our next item is item 11, the Metropolitan Planning Program Grant Municipal Agreement. Is there a motion to adopt a resolution authorizing the manager to negotiate and execute a municipal agreement with the NCDOT to support transit planning activities for the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization and adopt a resolution authorizing the manager to execute the interlocal agreements required with Airedale County Area Transportation System and Union County Transportation to support transit planning activities for the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization and adopt a resolution authorizing the manager or his designee to execute interlocal agreements with the Central Line Regional Council, the Town of Indian Trail, the Town of Matthew, Mooresville, and Stallings to support transportation planning projects.
Move to approve A, B, and C.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. I'm sorry.
After this,
Okay, all right. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. All right, thank you very much. All right, the next, all right, item 19, let's go to the consent item 19. My understanding is Mr. Ratliff is...
Yes, that is our only speaker.
Is our speaker. So, Mr. Ratliff?
He's coming down.
Yes, please come down. Oh, he is not who I was talking about. Let's go ahead, approve the item is item 19, to approve a contract for up to $5 million with HDR Engineering for planning and design services related to the proposed Links Red Line, and authorize the city manager to amend the contract consistent for the purpose for which the contract was approved.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Now we're open for discussion, and Mr. Ratliff?
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is TJ Ratliff. I live in the Sugar Creek, Noda area of Charlotte, District 1. If I look familiar, it's because I spoke in January advocating for car-free transportation options. If you recall, Mayor, you said you enjoyed my speech and that I should become a lobbyist. Honestly, it took me about 15 minutes to realize that was a compliment. Regardless, I'm here today to encourage everyone to support the HDR engineering contract to design the Red Line. Frankly, I don't expect much opposition to this measure due to how early this is in the process. Most procedural items like this would quietly pass without much discussion. But I want to say, good job, keep going. When they complete the design, push for completion in reality. I couldn't find the price of the original design from 2009, but I'm sure it wasn't cheap. We don't want to pay another $5 million in 14 years when this design goes out of date while we wait around for decent rail. I'm here to remind you that people care about this, and elections are soon. If you're nerdy enough to come to City Council on a Monday night, you probably already know that there is a primary election tomorrow. If you didn't like what you heard tonight, you can let them know very directly. Thank you for your time.
Thank Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming down.
That was good.
All right, there is a primary election tomorrow, and I hope that everyone would come out and exercise their right to vote. Your vote is your voice. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor of this item, please raise your hand. All right, anyone disapprove? Mr. Bakari as opposed. All right, so that takes us through our agenda.
Yeah, I just got one announcement if I can. This weekend in Greensboro, there was a very important game between North Carolina A&T and North Carolina Central. So we'd like to thank the folks at North Carolina A&T for hosting us for a great game. 22,000 people showed up. And to congratulate North Carolina Central University for winning the game 30-16. So we'd like to say thank you, and Mayor and Council, thank you for allowing me to make that announcement.
All right, I assume that means we have a motion to adjourn. The motion to adjourn.
To adjourn.
All inside, I'll get ready. We'll see you out at the
Everyone
ballot
stay
polls
safe tomorrow.
All right, thanks.